Jeff Nippard and many other fitness YouTube influencers appear to be extremely confused about the principles of exercise. And in this recent paper that Jeff Nippard shared that he was a part of, it really shows. The paper is titled Optimizing Resistance Training Technique to Maximize Muscle Hypertrophy, a Narrative Review. And in today's video, we're going to go over one of the principles of training, repetition tempo, and how they're actually wrong that a slower repetition tempo is less effective for muscle growth compared to a fast, concentric, like many of the modern fitness influencers believe. So let's take a look at what they say, and let's go over the actual literature and the actual evidence that they supported in this paper that shows that they're wrong. And in the first paragraph of repetition tempo, they say some researchers have even proposed performing both actions in a super slow manner, but the benefits of this strategy on hypertrophy remain poorly supported in the literature, and some evidence indicates a detrimental effect of very slow repetition tempos. Now the truth is, nobody from the super slow crowd claims that super slow repetitions are more effective for hypertrophy. They propose that they are safer, and this is basic fact. Slower repetition tempo and slower changes in direction will reduce peak forces, and peak force is what produces injury. The higher the peak force, the higher the shearing force on the connective tissues, the higher the likelihood of microtrauma or damage during the exercise itself. So the reason super slow even came about was to drastically reduce chances of injury, not for more muscle growth. But it seems a lot of the anti-high intensity training influencers think that high intensity training advocates propose that slower repetitions are more effective for muscle growth, when no one's even saying that. We are just saying that they are better for reducing chance of injury. And if you cannot see this as a personal trainer or a fitness professional, you are just oblivious to the common principles of mechanical physics. Now, the truth when it comes to repetition tempo is that all of them, if intensity of effort is controlled, if intensity of effort is the same between all repetition tempos, i.e. training to muscle failure, the outcome in the long run is going to be identical between faster repetition tempos or slower repetition tempos. Neither one is more effective than the other if you are training with the same amount of intensity, thereby the same amount of motor unit recruitment between both. The biggest difference is that people doing explosive or fast concentrics or explosive and fast repetition tempos are almost certainly going to encounter some kind of injury during their training career. Whereas an individual who does slow, controlled repetition tempos with slow and controlled changes in direction without any sort of explosive movements, it's going to be nearly impossible for them to get hurt because of the drastic reduction in peak forces. So the point of doing slower repetition tempos is not for maximizing hypertrophy. It is for maximizing safety. So the paper proposes a repetition duration between the eccentric and the concentric of about 3 to 8 seconds in each direction is sufficient for optimal hypertrophy. When I would argue the range is probably even more broad than that. It's probably 1 second to 30 seconds, honestly. The repetition duration doesn't really matter because movement is not required to recruit motor units. Motor units are recruited when a muscle produces force. When a muscle contracts against resistance, motor units are recruited. And you don't need movement to occur for this to happen. So believe it or not, that 3 to 8 second repetition recommendation is also pretty irrelevant. There's a form of training called time static contraction, which is brutally difficult and really improves muscular strength and size. I've used it myself. I've used it on clients. And I know many other practitioners who have used it as well with huge amounts of success. That requires no movement at all. It just simply requires contracting your muscles against an immovable resistance until your muscles fail. So that 3 to 8 second recommendation, good starting point, but still kind of irrelevant. And most of this comes from recommendations in a paper by a researcher by the name of Wilk. He proposed that a slower eccentric and a faster concentric or lifting phase actually produced better improvements in muscle hypertrophy. But when you actually look at the studies that he reviewed in his paper, none of them showed more muscle growth with faster lifting phases. Almost all of them showed the exact same amount of muscle hypertrophy between fast concentrics or slow concentrics. In fact, there were 3 papers that showed more muscle growth with slower lifting phases, the exact opposite of what his recommendations were. So I'm not sure where he came to that conclusion that faster concentrics and slower eccentrics were more effective for muscle growth when all the papers he reviewed did not show that, and in fact 3 showed the opposite, but nonetheless, that's what he proposed, and that is what they reported in Jeff Nippard's paper. But again, we do know that motor unit recruitment is based off of intensity of effort, not repetition tempo, not range of motion, not any of these other variables they're going to review in this paper. So as long as the intensity of effort is high, all this other stuff is completely irrelevant and it is a waste of mental energy and time. So at the conclusion of the section on repetition tempo, they state, overall, it does indeed appear that significant increases in hypertrophy can occur with repetition durations between 2 and 8 seconds, allowing for a plethora of acceptable eccentric and concentric tempos. That is correct. You can literally do whatever concentric and eccentric tempo you want as long as your intensity is high, but I really recommend you slow it down in order to reduce those peak forces and make sure you don't screw up your joints somewhere along the line of your training career. They finish by saying, based on the current literature, it is unclear whether extending the concentric or eccentric phase of the repetition will lead to greater hypertrophy, although it is advisable that eccentric actions be performed in a sufficiently controlled manner to ensure that the muscle controls the descent of the weight rather than relying solely on gravitational forces. This is correct, and the truth is, no matter how many papers they publish, no matter how much research they do, they're never going to find a different repetition tempo provides greater muscle growth, because motor unit recruitment, of course, comes down to how hard you push your body. And if you are pushing yourself harder with a faster repetition cadence, well, you're probably going to see better muscle growth. But if you push your body harder with a slower repetition cadence, you're probably going to see better muscle growth. So ignore all this repetition tempo nonsense. Focus on pushing your body hard. Focus on training hard and making sure you lift and lower the movement relatively slowly to make sure your muscle is doing all of the work and that you're not using momentum to help lift and lower the weight, thereby producing excessive force. I'm going to be going over all of the other training techniques listed in this paper in the next few videos, so go ahead and hit the like, subscribe, and the bell notification icon so you can be notified when I clear a lot of this stuff up for you. If you would like me to personally coach you into the best physique that you can possibly get, click the link in the description, book a free 30-minute call with me, and I'll show you how I can personally guide you to the best physique, the best strength, and the best overall health you've ever had in your life with just 2 workouts a week. Pay attention for the next video, guys. We're going to go over everything that this paper has to say.